Back in the Great Crusade, many Imperial organizations worked both on the battlefield and behind the scenes to keep the Imperium going. Some of these organizations have not survived the millennia since then, with almost all of the rest undergoing major changes to fit the post-Emperor galaxy. In a log long ago, we looked at one of the organizations that changed both a lot and also not at all. Its role has hardly changed between the pre- and post-heresy Imperium, but its structure all but disintegrated and is only now being re-centralized. As the Era Indomitus unfolds, tales and details both old and new are being revealed, and I feel it is now time to revisit the subject in a full addendum. Known colloquially as the Null Maidens, or more formally as the Anathema Psychana, they are the militant arm of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, the Sisters of Silence. This is Tactica Imperialis, and welcome to 40k Stories. First, a recap of our original log in brief, so we're all aware who and what the Sisters of Silence are. The Sisterhood was founded under less than clear circumstances. Some claim they predate the Imperium as an organisation, whilst others point to a time in the Great Crusade rumoured to be their debut, and others still suggest they were founded by the Emperor as the Crusade began. Whatever the truth of the matter, the Silent Sisters quickly earned something of a dread reputation by any who knew of their existence, perhaps unsurprisingly. Every member of the Sisterhood is what is known as an untouchable, or more commonly, a blank. This means that they are completely untouchable by the arts of the warp, hence the name, and their very presence is disruptive to all non-blanks, but utterly horrifying for any with psychic abilities. This made the Sisters the ultimate hunters of psykers, as their aura was a smothering void that could cut a connection to the immaterium, leaving even the most powerful of psykers without access to their abilities and exceptionally vulnerable. Combined with their extensive training and advanced equipment, the Null Maidens and their 1 in a trillion abilities were a potent force on the battlefield. But whilst they did see combat a lot in the Great Crusade, it was their other task that saw them become so feared: the Great Tithe. We've talked about the tithes of the Administratum in a log a while ago, but the Adeptus Astra Telepathica maintains a tithe of its own that is seen to by the League of Black Ships. This tithe collects the psykers on a given planet and transports them to Terra to become astropaths, battle psykers, or simply fuel for the Astronomicon or Golden Throne, and the Sisterhood usually form a garrison for the lower holds of the vessels. This is where the more powerful and dangerous psykers taken in the Great Tithe are kept, and it is very possible that the Null Maidens will have assisted the Astra Telepathica with securing this high-risk cargo in the first place. Arguably the most famous action taken by the Sisterhood came in the burning of Prospero at the dawn of the Horus Heresy, as a force of Sisters accompanied the Imperial censure fleet led by Primarch Leman Russ of the Space Wolves. During the battle against the Thousand Suns, they were the only thing capable of nullifying or even remotely countering the psychic and sorcerous abilities of the Sons of Magnus the Red. They did not fight the Crimson King personally, but they kept Russ and his cohorts safe from the psykers throughout the war to allow that final conflict between brothers to happen. After also seeing heavy fighting as part of the war in the Webway, the fate of the Null Maidens after the Horus Heresy was somewhat mysterious. It appeared as though the Sisterhood had disbanded in the minds of many, though a small group were later found during the War of the Beast and went on to play a critical role in winning that conflict for the Imperium. Whilst the rumours of disbandment were exaggerated and ultimately false, the combat presence of the Null Maidens was drastically reduced throughout the age of the Imperium post-heresy. In fact, the next time we can place that the Sisterhood did anything on a battlefield not directly concerning the Black Ships was all the way forward in M41 at the end of the Terran Crusade. The organisation had been on Luna back in the Great Crusade, but any Imperium-aligned members had relocated to Terra at some point, joining up with the Adeptus Custodes in the battle for Luna between the flagging Crusade and the Thousand Suns under the demonic Magnus the Red. Even a host of Null Maidens were unable to truly cut off the connection between Magnus and the Warp, but their presence was enough to at least disrupt the Crimson King and allow him to be trapped in the Webway. After this, the Sisters of Silence formed a key part of the Indomitus Crusade, with their warp immunity seemingly granting a means to get through the influx of warp storms that came with the Noctis Aeterna. But since that last log, there's been a bit more information that's come to light about the Sisterhood and their role in the new Imperium. There are two halves to the tale of the Sisters of Silence, the time of the Emperor and the Era Indomitus. We'll start with the ancient history first, it makes sense to work forwards after all, and look at how the Sisterhood was organised and recruited back in the Great Crusade. There are still blanks in the story, get it? Blanks. I amuse myself sometimes. But we do know that the Sisterhood had its headquarters at a place called the Somnus Citadel on Luna. The leading members of the Null Maidens formed a triumvirate. The Sister Commander was the overall leader, the Nemesis Praxia was charged with training in lawkeeping, and the Mistress of the Black Fleet, well, it's right there in the name, isn't it? The organisation was then split into two groups, though I very much expect that it wasn't an even distribution of power. Most will know the Chambers of Oblivion in principle, if not by name. Led by Oblivion Knights capable of making psychic powers actively dangerous to use, they formed the battlefield contingent of the Sisterhood. Lower ranks of the Chambers would likely be a good chunk of the Black Ship garrisons as well. However, the hunting of psykers sometimes requires a subtler hand, especially when individuals or worlds are being less than compliant, or there are other Imperial organisations at work. As a result, there was a secret police within the Sisterhood charged with dealing with those seeking to hide or shelter psykers, known as the Chamber of Judgment. If any of the Null Maidens worked for Malcador the Sigillite, or went on to play a role in the Inquisition, I would be very surprised if they hadn't at least spent some time in this chamber as an agent, hunter, or investigator. Whilst training of the Sisterhood was overseen by the Nemesis Praxia, and so presumably happened on Luna itself, the recruitment of its members, which could have been about several thousand by the end of the Great Crusade, is more of an unknown, supplemented only by some reasonable assumptions and some rumour. It's very likely that the Great Tithe itself allowed the Sisterhood to grow as the Imperium expanded. Many worlds will want rid of their blanks as much as they would the Psykers, and lumping them together when the Black Ships came would work just fine for them. Either that, or maybe the Sisterhood would take some time to seek them out. Rogue traders travelling beyond the Imperium may have also run across untouchables in their travels and recruited them, knowing how valuable they would be to the Imperium. This is something they still do today, actually, though the Inquisition plays a role in it too, since they can poke around on Imperial worlds to look for things whenever they so choose. However, there are whispers that there are some more stable routes that the Null Maidens kept and continue to keep hidden. Bloodlines protected by the Sisterhood that assumedly have a high birth rate for untouchables, or perhaps some form of trait that makes it common as opposed to a 1 in a trillion random chance. I have no evidence, no one does, but the rumours seem to have stuck around, so who knows, maybe there is something there. Training for the Sisters begins early, but the vow of silence taken by all Sisters, known officially as the Vow of Tranquility, is actually the final step in the ascension of a Sister from an Acolyte to a full-blown Null Maiden. There are many ranks within the Acolyte, but the most famous post is held by individuals who are, perhaps more literally than usual, the voice of the Silent Sisterhood. These women are known as prolocors, presumably high-ranking acolytes, and they serve as translators to allow the superiors of the Sisterhood to commune with outsiders who won't speak their particular language, as it were. The Null Maidens use a series of different sign languages to communicate with each other, but the most common form is the subtle, nuanced thought mark. Presumably the prolocors know it exceptionally well in order to function as translators and diplomats. It was and still is rumoured that the Sisters do the battle signs of the Astartes despite having their own combat version of Thoughtmark. This has never been truly substantiated, but I really would not be surprised. However, the power base of the Sisters of Silence was undoubtedly shattered by the events of the Horus Heresy and the internment of the Emperor upon the Golden Throne. The battles of the War in the Webway decimated their numbers and then some, and the Siege of Terror and the Great Scouring killed and scattered almost the entire Sisterhood. With leadership and direction seemingly lost for the organisation, many of them settled into new lives or formed their own isolated groups acting independently from each other and the Imperium. In fact, many believe that the Silent Sisters were gone, perhaps even extinct. The War of the Beast showed that some survived though, and the group slowly, eventually rebuilt. But those isolated groups who had been formed in the aftermath were still out there even as the contingent on Sol got its act together, largely unaware of the other Silent Sisters and the organisation that they once fought in. The intervention of the Sisterhood on Luna reaffirmed to the reborn Robert Guilliman something he had learned from the Emperor: the value of the Null Maidens. As such, he sought to harness their abilities for his rapidly assembling Indomitus crusade. The Luna contingent of sisters were sent out by Guilliman under the authority of a decree called the Dispensatus Anathema, calling all Silent Sisters to return to Terra from the nearest sectors to Sol. All told, some 3,000 sisters from the main force and the various isolated groups would be mustered on Terra in time, each armed with a slightly different skill set and a character, but undivided in their service of the Imperium. These 3,000 became the first of the Vigils, known as the Vigil Indomitus, and their members would be subdivided amongst the battle groups of the Indomitus Crusade. The subgroups would also attempt to found new Vigils as they went along in order to maintain the presence of the Sisterhood across later fleets, which met with mixed success due to bureaucracy and the tumultuous nature of the entire Indomitus Crusade. But every fleet that contained the Sisters found the warp storms in their way somewhat becalmed, allowing for much greater progress than expected thanks simply to the presence of the Null Maidens. With the recent psychic awakening that has been unleashed across the galaxy, I suspect that the Sisters are more valuable than ever. But the Sisterhood needed to cement itself across the Imperium once again, rather than simply striking out on Terra or remaining on the black ships in the flights of crows following the Crusade. As the net of the Crusade spread wider, the Sisterhood was brought back into contact with the various subgroups that had been isolated over the millennia. They weren't the same people, obviously, and there was of course divergence, but even generations later, the duty and power of these groups was somehow undiminished, not even lost at all. Perhaps. This allowed for new vigils to be founded under the decree of the Dispensatus Anathema, using the spire convents of the subgroups as bases of operations, whilst those attached to the Crusade would use their capital ships in such a role in a manner akin to fleet-based Astartes chapters. The cadres within these vigils now form the fighting and psyker hunting strength of the Silent Sisterhood across much of the galaxy, allowing the duty of the black ships to continue with as little impedance as possible. Though the Indomitus Crusade is officially over according to Guilliman's triumph at Rorkos, the Dispensatus still stands, and so the Sisterhood still expands. I doubt the membership is any more than 50,000 even now, but that doesn't detract from their importance and their power. Plus, the semi-decentralized and relatively autonomous nature of each vigil means that the Null Maidens can adapt and respond more quickly to the threat of psykers or the disruption of the Great Tithe relatively quickly, allowing the organisation to expand and fight more organically than possibly even in the days of the Emperor. Will it be enough? With the state of the galaxy and the Imperium, it's impossible to say. But the Sisters of Silence, despite never speaking, will not go quietly even if the Imperium cannot survive the oncoming period. Well, the Indomitus Crusade gave it, and them, a chance at rebuilding and surviving, but it will never quite be the same as the glory days under the Emperor's direct rule, even though his son is now at the helm. So ends the updated tales of the Sisters of Silence, for now at the very least. Whilst there are still many unanswered mysteries about the Null Maidens, many blanks in the tale that we'd wish to fill, we now at least have some understanding of their current status in the Imperium, as well as some insight into their organisation of the past. Their creation and inception will likely remain a mystery forever, but their importance today is perhaps greater than it has ever been thanks to the Cicatrix Maledictum and the ever-growing needs of the Golden Throne. For now though, we must move on. I think our next stop will actually be a place I actually thought we were done with visiting. Sadly, I was wrong. We've looked at most of the major forces in that region, but there are a group of smaller neutral players that all have their own role to play in that thing of an ecosystem. So that's where we'll be soon, and hopefully this time for real it will be our last visit. Thank you for watching Tactica Imperialis, and I'll see you all again. Goodbye.